Welcome everyone, and thank you so much for joining us for this very special presentation today. This is the sixth in our Kirby Centre Wellness Week series of presentations featuring some of Calgary's leading providers of information, products, and services for 55 plus lifestyle. We hope that these presentations will provide you with ways to enhance your health, stay active, and live your best life. As we gather here today, it's vital we also remember the peoples who've gathered here for millennia. This is the Treaty 7 land of the Indigenous peoples of southern Alberta, the Blackfoot nations of Siksika, Piikani, Kainai, and the Tsuut'ina First Nation, the Stoney Nakoda nations of Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Wesley, and the historic home of the Northwest Métis and Métis Nation of Alberta Region 3. It is with the goal of reconciliation that we acknowledge the land on which we gather, and we thank the elders of these nations for their timeless contributions to this land. And today we're very pleased to welcome Dr. Carrie Scarff. Dr. Scarff is a registered audiologist, PhD, and completed her Master of Science in Audiology at Dalhousie University. Clinical audiology internships at Georgetown Medical Center in Washington, D.C., and the IWK Grace Hospital in Halifax, and her PhD in postdoc in auditory behavioral neuroscience at the University of Calgary in the area of brain plasticity and hearing research. She has publications in the areas of early identification of hearing loss and auditory cortical plasticity following hearing loss with her colleagues at the University of Calgary and Dalhousie University. Dr. Scarff currently practices at and manages her multi-site clinics, Audiology Innovations Limited, in the Mission, Glenbrook, and Mount Royal areas of Calgary with her colleagues. Her clinics also offer mobile clinical care for patients with mobility issues. She was a long-standing board of director with the Deaf and Hear Alberta nonprofit organization in Calgary and is often invited to educate and inform agencies, the general public, and the government about hearing loss issues, new research, and treatments. She takes a particular interest in brain plasticity and advancements in hearing loss treatment. She and her colleagues provide the latest advancements in research and technology to treat hearing loss. Dr. Scarff, tell us how we can tell if we have a hearing problem and what we might be able to do with it with your support.
Great. Thank you. So today we're going to talk about hearing health in 2020 and beyond. And I'm going to be answering that question that you posed to me, Colleen, and many more in this presentation. So let's start by, I'm just going to share my screen with everyone. There we go. Okay. Here we are. So how to hear better in 2020 and beyond. So thanks everyone for joining us. One thing about COVID that's actually been a positive is being able to share the message of hearing health education with people who maybe couldn't have come out to a presentation to see me if I was at the Kirby Centre in person. So, everyone has had to adapt a little bit and become a little bit more comfortable with technology. And because of that, there are some positives like learning about new things in hearing health, among others. And the Kirby Centre is a great resource for sharing these wonderful opportunities with you. So thank you to the Kirby Centre for hosting me also. Okay, so one thing I want to mention is that when I do these presentations, and I am asked to do presentations like this on a pretty regular basis. I've been doing them on Zoom and Teams and WebEx, every couple weeks now. But I want to point out that it's not just about me talking to you. I really learn a great deal from the people that are involved in the presentation. So please do make comments and ask questions, because that's actually how I learn and filter what's important to the audience. So, I have a background in science, hearing science, and a PhD in auditory behavioral neuroscience, so I can speak about a lot of things, but what is important is to know what you want to know about with regards to your hearing and brain science. So please do interrupt us as we go through. I'm happy to take questions as we go through the presentation, and I really I welcome them. Okay, so here's a picture of my team. So about, gosh, sorry, I'm just having trouble with slides here. About 15 years ago, I started my clinic in the hopes of bringing what I learned in science to the general population. So people who have hearing loss and go to a clinic, I want to make sure that you get the latest research information and that we implement what we know from science and research into our everyday interactions with patients. So that's really why I started my clinics, Audiology Innovations. Like Colleen mentioned, we have right now 3 locations, but we can also come to patients, because that's one thing, especially a lot of our patients from the Kirby Center, they might have mobility issues. So we are able to actually come to you if you need help from us and you are perhaps restricted in your mobility in where you live or with transportation. So that's one of the things that we've decided to do. I'm just going to adjust my slides here. Give me a moment. Sorry, Colleen. There we go. Okay, so here's our all the folks on our team. I have wonderful clinicians. What does that mean? That means the people who actually work with you and do patient care from all over the world now. We have one from South Africa, an audiologist there. We have one who trained in Australia, an audiologist from who trained there, as well as Elan, who works out of the Glenbrook office, and he's the one who can go out to your home and or your seniors residence and help you. Okay, so this is really interesting picture. I like to start out the presentation by sharing this picture. So did you know that even before we had to start wearing masks in Calgary and Alberta, 48% of Canadians had enough hearing loss by age 60 that they had trouble understanding speech correctly? So almost half of Canadians over age 60 have enough hearing loss that it makes it hard to get the message properly. So what happens with hearing loss? These pictures are a really nice indicator. So the picture that shows the graph with the vowels and consonants cut off, the dark blue part is what a typical hearing loss looks like. Okay, so when we look at that graph, it tells us how we hear left representing the low frequencies to right representing the high frequencies. And if any of you have gone for a hearing test, which I'm sure many of you have, you've probably had a graph like this, and it looked like a little bit like a ski slope where if we look at that white line kind of outlining the blue area, it kind of goes down just like a hill or like a ski slope. Well, what that tells us is the right-hand side of the graph has been affected by your hearing loss. So it's harder for you to hear the high frequencies. And you'll notice that the vowels are still nice and uncovered by your hearing loss, but that red bubble, which actually says consonants, if you have a hearing loss like the one on this graph, they are going to be affected by your hearing loss. This is a typical hearing loss of someone who's maybe between age 65 and 75. So guess what? If you have a hearing loss like this, although it doesn't affect your ability to hear every kind of sound, it affects your ability to hear the important consonants, which give you the feeling that people are speaking clearly. So a lot of people will come to us and say, I can hear people talking, but they're not speaking clearly. They're not articulating. They're not, it's because of what they're doing. I don't think I have a hearing loss, but I can't understand them because they're not articulating or speaking clearly. Well, it turns out that if you feel that way, and you're over age 60, looking at this graph on the right-hand side, that's an average kind of hearing loss, like I mentioned, for age 65 to 75. And if you are experiencing these types of things, it's actually probably because of an underlying hearing loss that is affecting your ability to hear certain types of sounds. So I think what's important for the general public to know is that when we have hearing loss, the hearing loss doesn't affect all the sounds to the same extent. And that's very important. It makes it feel like people are mumbling, not articulating, or not speaking clearly. Okay, so I always like to start with that because a lot of people I know who come to these presentations or even come in for a test will say, well, I don't think I have a hearing loss, but people seem to mumble or not speak clearly. So those are some of the first signs that you are not getting all of the sounds that you really need to hear correctly for your hearing and for your brain. So why do we get this hearing loss? It has to do with something called hair cell deterioration. So if you look at the top picture, sound travels down that ear canal. It vibrates the eardrum. It vibrates the bones in the middle ear, which in turn vibrates the cochlea. The cochlea is just a fancy word for the sense organ for hearing. It looks kind of like a seashell. It's not actually purple inside our ear. And there are tiny little hair cells inside the cochlea that, when they get stimulated properly, send the proper message through the nerve and up to the brain. So the bottom picture is a nice picture of what the hair cells look like when they're healthy. You can kind of make the analogy with the tread on your tires. Okay, so when you get a new vehicle, you know how the tread is very, very, all those little treads are standing up nicely and perfectly, and they haven't been worn down. Over time, what happens is these nice little healthy hair cells, and there's two different types. There's one type at the top, one type at the bottom. They're both equally important. But what happens is, instead of being neatly lined up and fully formed, just like this as a close-up, they actually get worn down. So you can see there's some that are still remaining here, and the other ones have kind of shortened and worn down. So when we have hearing loss, 9 times out of 10, it's actually related to just simple wear and tear of our inner ears. And there's not much we can do about it. The longer that we live, the more that our ears wear out. So that is why we have the hearing loss. Now, the important, or maybe interesting thing to understand, is those little tiny hair cells that wear down first. The ones that wear down first are responsible for those high frequency treble sounds where the consonants lie, S's and F's and TH's, and all those important soft little letters that help us feel like people are speaking clearly. So when we have hearing loss, the first sounds that we lose are those ones that are found in the high frequencies. And that's why people feel like others might be mumbling or not speaking clearly. Okay. So one thing I want to mention is, with COVID, things have really shifted, and a lot of people are feeling like they're not hearing as well during COVID. So why is this? There's a couple things. When we do go out, which is less and less these days, there are a lot of barriers, a lot of plexiglass barriers, perhaps. And if you're trying to talk to the cashier or they're trying to talk to you, of course, that barrier blocks some of the sound from getting from their mouth to your ear. People are also wearing masks. So not only does it block the sound from getting from their mouth to your ear, but it actually blocks certain sounds more than others. And it seems to block the high frequency sounds again. So it makes things feel like people are mumbling. I'm just going to go up here and just make sure I'm not missing any questions. Okay, good. So like I mentioned, if you feel like people are mumbling, and perhaps more so now that they're wearing masks, it might be that there's actually some underlying high frequency hearing loss. Oops. And there's one more reason that COVID is making our hearing loss more noticeable, is that, of course, we're speaking from a distance quite often. And you can think about sound like airflow, okay? The reason that we wear masks is to protect the air droplets from our mouth reaching someone else. Well, you can imagine the closer we are, the more airflow from our mouth gets to that person, not just to their face, but also to their ear. So if we are further away from the person, then not as much sound from our voice will get to their ear. So all of these reasons, that, all of the things that we're doing to help keep us safe during COVID actually make it harder for us to hear in many situations. Um, and yeah, mentioning masks again, they actually muffle those consonant sounds, just like I was saying, that a typical age-related hearing loss shows as well. So here's some recent research. If somebody is wearing a mask and they have some hearing loss, even if they don't have some hearing loss, wearing a surgical mask equates to a 10% reduction in how much sound is going to get to your ears. And wearing a N95, so if you go in for a medical procedure at a hospital or something where they're wearing an N95, that actually equates to a 25% or more reduction in how much sound you're going to get from them. So you can imagine if you already have some hearing loss and people are wearing masks, and it's going to become, your hearing loss is going to become much more noticeable. And in some cases, the speech can be almost unintelligible for people who have a lot of hearing loss if someone is wearing a mask. So what we do at our clinic, if someone has a lot of difficulty with their hearing and uses lip reading a lot, okay, because of course if we're wearing a mask, then you can't read our lips and get a lot of information visually. Then what we'll do is we'll stay at a distance and we'll put on a clear face visor so that they can still read our lips and we can have a conversation. So the interesting thing about COVID is a lot of people are noticing their hearing loss more. When I gave that result, I would say that almost 48% of Canadians over 60 have a hearing loss. What I didn't add is one bit of that study, which was from the Canadian Health Measures Aging Study, that was even more interesting to me. I was not surprised by the percentage of people who have a hearing loss because this is my area of scientific research and my background. What I was surprised about was that 70% of those people who had hearing loss in that study, and that's a huge study across Canada, hundreds of thousands of people, 70% of the ones who had hearing loss were not aware that they had hearing loss. Okay, so that was really, really important because it makes us realize a few things that we as health professionals need to really share the message of hearing health more so that people know what to look for and know what to do, because there are very important consequences if we leave hearing loss without treatment for too long. And the other thing that's important is that 3/4 of people who have hearing loss actually do nothing about it. So even once they identify that they have hearing loss, they choose to do nothing or they don't take any action. So why is this? Why do they wait so long? If they do take action, the average period of time that they wait is 7 to 10 years. And that's just too long when we know that the research shows after 4.5 years, we get permanent deteriorations of the cells in the brain that are responsible for understanding what we hear. Okay, so if we have a hearing loss and we're walking around with it and we don't do anything about it, we might make, compensations and adapt and think other people are just mumbling and it's not our problem, it's their problem. Well, it is our problem, not just at our ears, but at our brain. It's like we're walking around with our fingers blocking part of the sounds that are coming in. We're not getting the proper stimulation up to the brain, and there's a higher risk of dementia when that happens. So we're going to talk about that in more detail in a moment. There's a higher risk of balance problems, and there's a higher risk of depression if we do nothing. So waiting 7 to 10 years is far too long. So this is the new research that came out. So I keep track of all of the research that comes out. Like Colleen mentioned, I have my doctorate in auditory science and the brain. And so I read an article in 2017 from a large scientific journal called The Lancet. And they were very interested in looking at risk factors for dementia. So their studies were nothing to do with hearing loss per se. They actually put out a cumulative report from multiple studies throughout the world to identify the highest risk factors for dementia. And what was surprising to many people was that besides hypertension, besides social isolation, besides poor nutrition and lack of education, hearing loss was identified as one of those top 9 risk factors for dementia. And in fact, hearing loss was the top modifiable risk factor for dementia. So we have genetics that plays a big role in our risk for dementia. That's not modifiable. But of the things that we can change, hearing loss came out as the top modifiable thing that we can change. So that was really interesting. Now, the update to that research came out this summer, just in August. It didn't really reach popular media much, as nearly as closely as the 2017 research, which many people have heard of, many physicians have heard of. But this year, we obviously have other things going on in the world, in particular COVID. So popular media really didn't pick up the updated version of this paper from the Lancet. But what the Lancet did was the commission came out with an update to their original paper. And they said, guess what? There's 2 more modifiable factors for dementia. One is air pollution and one is head injury. So again, not surprising, but what they said was there's enough evidence now in the research to say there's 2 additional modifiable factors for dementia. And they confirmed that hearing loss is still the top modifiable factor for dementia. And they also confirmed that there's enough evidence now in research to support the fact that not only is hearing loss the most highest risk factor for dementia, but if we wear hearing aids, if they're recommended, that actually reduces the risk factor significantly. So it was the first time where there's strong research from a large, several large scale studies and a very well respected international journal to say, if we wear hearing aids, we can do something about this. So that was very important information and just really highlights the fact that, and the other thing that's interesting is they weren't just talking about seniors. All of this research is in people over age 50. So really anyone over age 50 who has any signs or symptoms of hearing loss should have a test, and definitely people over age 60, whether or not they have signs or symptoms of hearing loss, they should definitely have a test as well. Okay, so here are the signs and symptoms of hearing loss to look for. And I always suggest testing, and I always like, if you know someone who's experiencing these signs or symptoms, or even yourself, then it's a good idea to get a test. So we're not talking about experiencing these things just one time out of the blue. We're talking about these signs or symptoms on a frequent basis. So you should, excuse me, not be frequently asking people to repeat, turning up the television or radio louder than others. So if people come over, maybe you have a care worker or family member, if you're turning those things up and they come in the house and say, oh, that's way too loud, that could be a sign or symptom. Excuse me one moment. Difficulty hearing if people have their back turned. So if someone comes over to drop off groceries and then they turn their back away, then that would be, and you have a lot more difficulty, then that might be a sign or symptom. Feeling like other people mumble, again, going back to the beginning, where I said, if it feels like people are mumbling or not speaking clearly repeatedly, that's also something. Oh, and I just have a question here. Sorry, I may as well go into this. Oh, okay. And actually, there was another question about why this presentation isn't captioned. So you should be able to turn on the captioning on your computer, on your iPad when you go into your settings. So I would highly recommend that. Yes. And then another person just said, I can hear you very clearly. Does that mean my hearing is fine? I'm age 75. So no, not necessarily. So This is one particular situation where I'm speaking nice and clearly close to the microphone. You're able to see me. So what I want you to focus on is some of the other signs or symptoms that I'm mentioning here. So difficulty in background noise is another one of the first signs or symptoms. So that would pertain to the question that was just asked. Um, yeah, you might have no trouble if someone is speaking directly to you, but then you get to the grocery store and there's other people in the background and machine noise and you have difficulty. That could be a sign or symptom of hearing loss. Another sign or symptom is tinnitus, ringing, or yeah, any kind of ringing or kind of white noise in the background when there is no real noise. So that's called tinnitus, and that is a sign or symptom. It occurs frequently with people who have hearing loss. And then, of course, new COVID symptoms to consider: difficulty hearing when people are at a distance. Like if, in the summertime, for example, we had a barbecue in our backyard. It was my parents' anniversary. And I know that some people there were having a bit more trouble hearing because we were at a distance from them, or difficulty hearing when people are wearing masks. Okay, so here's the picture of the dementia research infographic. And again, I mentioned in 2017, they found hearing loss was the top modifiable factor for dementia. And in 2020, they confirmed that this is still the case, and that if we do something about our hearing loss with hearing aids, we can reduce that risk by a full 8%, which is the highest thing that we can change. And they, also mentioned that it's midlife, not just seniors. So that just goes to show that if we do have any kind of the signs or symptoms after age 50, we should really have a quick baseline evaluation. So why do adults with hearing loss, and particularly older adults with hearing loss, like those over 50 or those over 60, appear more likely to develop dementia? So there's a couple reasons. One is actual physical brain changes. So we don't necessarily lose brain cells, but the structures shrink. If they don't get the proper stimulation, it's very similar to a muscle. We need to have that proper stimulation. So again, if we're not hearing all of the sounds correctly from our ears, so if our ears, if those hair cells have worn down and they can't send all of the information up to our brain, the cells at the brain actually atrophy and shrink and cannot be used. Okay, so it's like a physical kind of like a muscle. The difference is that once they're atrophied, we cannot re-engage them. So it's a permanent change. The other factor, which is really important to consider, and the fact that all the people on this call who are doing a Zoom call and are part of Kirby activities, that's so important because it's a way for you to not be socially isolated. So when people have hearing loss and don't do anything about it, they often feel uncomfortable in groups, uncomfortable in all sorts of different situations that they used to enjoy, maybe playing cards, maybe even doing a Zoom call with somebody. So they start to isolate. And we have known for about 30 or 40 years that people who aren't socially engaged are at higher risk for dementia. So that's important too. Let's go back to COVID again about distancing. So, not only is distancing going to affect how much sound gets to your ear, but there's also distractions in between you and the person that you're talking to. So there's more chance for background noise interaction. So that's important to understand. And the other thing that I like to do is to talk about what we can do to try to overcome some of these challenges with distancing, with masks, etc. So with masks, tip number one will be asking people to repeat things. So let's say you go to the grocery store and someone says something to you and you don't get what they say. Instead of just asking them to repeat, or if your spouse says something, instead of just saying pardon, you can say, can you say that in a different way? So see, if the person says the words and the sentence in the exact same way, some of those words might be in the frequency range that you have more difficulty with, whether you know it or not. So if they say the words or describe them in a different way, you might have a better chance of understanding what they say. The other, probably most important tip with people that we're around on a regular basis is to have them get our attention before they start talking to us. Our brain is responsible for doing so many things at the same time. And if it has to, you know, switch from what it's doing, let's say you're reading the newspaper, let's say your spouse is reading the newspaper and you start talking to them out of the blue, if it doesn't know to switch to listening, it's then their ability to follow what you say to your spouse is going to be delayed, and they may not even know you're talking to them until you're halfway through your sentence or your conversation. So we have to kind of help guide the brain at getting ready to listen. We hear with our ears, but we interpret, assimilate, process, and understand what we hear with our brain. And if our brain isn't ready to do all of those things, we can mistake things, especially if, you know, someone's wearing a mask, especially if they're at a distance, especially during the times of COVID. Now, if you're in a situation where you're having difficulty with what's being said and the person can remove the mask because you're at a distance, or perhaps you know, it's a situation where they have a face mask, that can be a really good opportunity to get important information across. So we've invested in face masks. They're not very expensive. You know, we have some other organizations who've asked us where we found them, and we provided that information to them. And like I mentioned, with some of our patients, we have to wear face masks and be at a distance so that they can read our lips. But some of our patients have purchased face masks from different places so that when they're out with their spouse can still understand what they're saying, because they're not picking up quite as much with the ears, but they'll be getting some of the visual cues. So that's an option. There are also face masks with clear mouth areas that you can look up online through Amazon and different places. So that can be a really good option. And then if you're stuck, you can certainly, don't forget to use, you know, the written word, right? You can write down things on paper, just the high points, the most important words, or use your iPad or your phone to jot down the most important words to get the message across. And then preparing in advance helps too. If you happen to be going to a clinic or for an appointment, it's a good idea to speak with them and try to get an idea of how the flow of that appointment will go and things to anticipate, because our brain will be ready to hear sounds that we are expecting to hear. And then you can also use something that's called a talk to text app on your phone. So we're going to review that briefly now. Here's just a picture of the some different kinds of clear masks that we've used in the past. And here's the talk to text app. So what happens with this talk to text app is you go on your phone, you go either to the Apple store or you know, the Google store, and you download an app onto your phone. And then what happens is your phone is like a microphone, and you just point it at the person talking. So I could point it at the person at the grocery store talking, and then their voice will get translated into text so that you can get all the words that they're saying. It's a really great, easy, quick way to break down the communication barrier if you're at a coffee shop, or if you're at the grocery store, or if you're at the bank. It's a free app, and you just have to look for the apps on Google. The one that I've used before is called AVA, so AVA live captioning, and it works seamlessly, super easy thing to do. You know, even if you're with, let's say you're with your daughter, or like if you don't have a smartphone, if you're with someone, they can download the app and point it at the person and show you what's being said also. Microphones. So a lot of people really are not familiar with the fact that although there are hearing aids, and I actually wear hearing aids myself because I have some hearing loss in my family, and I have hearing loss of my own, there are other options to help us hear things, especially if we're in group situations or at a distance. And these things can be used with hearing aids. Yeah, and there's actually a question now about personal amplification devices. So that's exactly what I'm talking about now. So these are called FM systems sometimes, or one company calls them Roger systems. But basically they're microphones. And so if you already have hearing aids, and it doesn't really matter what kind, most of them can be adapted to use these microphones. So they can be used with the hearing aid. So here's an example of my microphone. Okay. So it's the one in the middle picture. So if I was to have dinner with my family at home or actually maybe if we have music on at the family dinner table, or if we were at a restaurant, we're not going to restaurants right now, but if we were, I would just put this little microphone on the table as shown in the bottom picture, and it would pick up the people's voices around the table. I can actually, there's a little a zoom. I can press the different buttons to zoom on the different people, and then it would pick up their voice and send it directly to my ears. Okay, so it's helping with the distance and it's helping with the background noise. And um, the other option is the pen. I'll show you. So this is my pen. So same thing. Let's say I'm at a, during normal Christmas time, we go to a lot of cocktail parties. So at the cocktail party, I could just hold this pen standing up and I could kind of point it towards the person I'm talking to. I would just tell them, I'm not recording you. I'm trying to hear what you say better. This picks up your voice, and sends it to my ears. And so these kinds of microphones are a game changer because, of course, wherever they are, it's like you have an extra ear. You could put it in front of the TV. You could put it in front of the radio. You could, we have one lady who put one, she used Velcro to put it on top of her minivan to the roof in the back of the car so she could hear her kids better. So why is it different than hearing aids? It's because we can put it where the sound is that we want to hear. So that cuts the distance and that also cuts any sound distractions. So there's a question about the cost of the microphone. So it depends. There's lots of different microphones. It depends what kind of hearing aid you have. If we have to get an adapter, there's some basic microphones that are maybe a few $100s, and then there's some microphones that are up to a couple $1,000s. So it just depends on what you need it for. For example, there's one that's very basic and that your spouse could wear. You would be driving in a car and you would hear their voice directly into your hearing aid. So yeah, there's a range of cost. The name of the app is AVA. AVA is the name of the app for the text. Yeah, somebody's asked me the name of the app, so that's good. AVA. But you can do a little Google search. There are some other apps now too that basically translate sound to text. All right, let's see here. Go to the next slide. There we go. Yeah, I showed you mine. Okay, so here's some examples of how the microphones work. So if you look at the top left picture, that's people at a dinner table. The person's voice is getting picked up by the microphone and it's getting sent to directly to the person's hearing aid. Here's a picture of my pen that I use on the table. Here's a picture of someone, it looks like at a park. So this girl is talking, her voice gets picked up by the microphone, it gets sent directly to the hearing aid. Yeah, and the person points the pen at the speaker. It's directional. I'm just going to check. It looks like there might be another question. Oh, yeah, let's see. No, oh, yeah. What if you don't have a hearing aid? Can you still use these? So, no, you can't. So currently right now, no, you can't. You would need a hearing aid to connect with these types of microphones. There's another question about room microphones could work without hearing aids. Okay, so yeah, if you're in a place where it's called a sound filled FM. So basically what that means is like in a classroom or at a church, they can install speakers into the ceilings, or there's portable ones as well. And then whoever speaks into the microphone, the sound goes to everyone in the room. So that's another version of these microphone systems. They do install them sometimes in schools. There's a few churches I know that have installed them, a few community groups have installed them also. So that was another question I had. Okay, and here's another thing you can do to help yourself, not just during COVID, but moving forward to keep your brain working better in noise. One thing I didn't tell you is whether you have hearing loss or not, after age 35, our brain changes in its ability to filter out background noise. So our brain has it does a lot of processing. And when we are born, our brain actually isn't fully formed for the listening centers. And that doesn't occur till age 19. So a lot of children will have trouble in noisy classrooms because their auditory system hasn't completely developed. It generally matures by age 19, and then we don't have as much trouble listening in noise. But by age 35, it starts to go downhill again. So everyone tends to have a little bit more difficulty trying to listen if they're in background noise after age 35. But if we have hearing loss, it becomes more noticeable. Okay. So some things we can do. We can, yes, we can use, a talk to text app for a certain specific situation. We can use a microphone if we need to. But we can also do some brain training. So there's a free program that I looked into and I was trained about. Basically, people who have really severe hearing loss and can't even use hearing aids, sometimes they get an implant. It's called a cochlear implant. If their hair cells are completely destroyed from life, wear and tear, or perhaps they're born that way, then physicians, surgeons can implant a little device deep inside their ear that directly stimulates the nerve and then in turn stimulates the brain. But things sound really mechanical to them. Sound isn't like it is to a normal hearing person. So they have to do special listening training. And one of the cochlear implant companies put together a great free online resource that they can use to practice their listening skills. But it can also be used for anyone who wants to practice their listening skills. So what you need to do is determine what you want to improve. Maybe you want to practice listening to people speak quickly. Maybe you want to practice and improve your ability to listen in noise. So kind of think about what your goals are, and then go to their website. It's hearingsuccess.com, and look for their sound success listening program. So we always suggest you start with an easy voice. You start with, and then you can just practice listening to them and watching them. Then just practice listening to them and adding some noise. Then practice listening to them without watching them. So there's some different practice you can do. And it, it's just a great way to keep your brain listening skills tuned up. Just going to check for questions. Okay, so one of the patients said that they have one of the microphones that we are talking about, and they use it in a yoga class, and it's amazing. So I bet that what they do is have their instructor either wear the microphone around their neck or on their lapel, or have the instructor put it close to them. Yeah, so that's great feedback. And then it also said, do you think one of the reasons that people delay getting their hearing checked is that they're worried about the hearing aid cost? Yes, absolutely. That's one of the reasons. So I'm going to talk about some different programs that there are for, particularly for seniors in just a second. But that is definitely one of the reasons why it seems like people don't do anything about their hearing. Okay, so if you do happen to have hearing aids, or you know someone who does, going back to that previous comment, hearing aids are a big investment. So we want to make sure you don't lose them if you have them. We have had about 7 or more now people lose their hearing aids because of masks. So you have to be really careful when you're taking off your mask so it doesn't loosen your hearing aid. So I have hearing aids on right now. So here's my hearing aid. And if I wasn't careful taking off my mask, it could dislodge my hearing aid from around my neck. So there's some different ways to, be cognizant of this. Either just go slowly when you're taking off the mask, or you can use a mask extender so that the mask doesn't really sit exactly where the hearing aid sits. And there's a couple pictures of different kinds of mask extenders. I've used a paper clip or a couple paper clips before, and that actually does the trick as well. So here's a couple updates about hearing aids. Lots of different hearing aids on the market. What's more important is to find a hearing aid that works for you than to look at all the different advertising. Most of the stuff we see in the newspaper or different places, even Facebook, is simply advertising. So we need to be sure that if we need hearing aids, we are getting the support proper hearing aids that are going to work for your lifestyle and for your hearing profile. There's a million different ones out there. Let's talk about some of the new things. There's implantable hearing aids for people who have trouble perhaps with batteries and taking care of their hearing aids. So we can put hearing aids into their ears. They stay in for a few months at a time, and then we exchange them. There's also rechargeable hearing aids. So that's shown down at the bottom. That makes it much easier for people who have dexterity issues as well. There's someone asked a question here about products available to help hearing loss due to nerve damage in one ear. So yes, absolutely. So what I didn't mention when I was talking about hearing loss at first is that the most typical type of hearing loss is called sensory neural hearing loss, but it's a misnomer. It's poorly named. 99% of hearing losses are not the nerve. They're actually the hair cells that I showed you at the beginning of the presentation. So if someone has told you you have nerve loss or nerve hearing loss, I would suggest getting a second opinion. A lot of physicians will call it that, but not realize what it really is. So that's just really important to understand. And if you have hearing loss in one ear, um, you know, if it can be treated because it's due to the hair cells, then a hearing aid device would help you. If you truly have nerve deafness in one ear where your ear and your brain doesn't make sense of sound and the nerve has been damaged, then there's a different system we can use where we pick up sound on that side and send it to the other ear for the brain to make sense of. So yes, there's almost always an option regardless of the type of hearing loss you have. Another question, do earplugs when you're sleeping cause a plug of earwax in the ear canal? It depends on your ears. It really does. So when you go into your family physician, make sure that they check your ears and that wax isn't blocking them up. We have patients who come in and think that their hearing loss is just due to, wax blocking their ears, but wax blocking the ears, if that is, the case, it only causes generally a mild hearing loss. So even if someone has wax blocking the ears, there's probably some underlying other hair cell hearing loss also. Yeah, and so here's the cross system I was mentioning. If you have true nerve damage where your ear doesn't work, you can use a special cross system to still help you hear better. Bluetooth devices. So right now I'm actually talking to you through my hearing aids. My hearing aid microphones are picking up my voice and sending it to the laptop, you guys. And when Colleen was talking, the laptop was sending the sound to my hearing aids through Bluetooth. So there's lots of great advantages to that, because if I go for a walk and I want to listen to music or a podcast, I just have to press play on my phone and it can be in my pocket and I can hear the sound through my hearing aids. Hearing aids are much more water resistant than they ever were, which is great because Calgarians are active and even our seniors are very, very active. So, they sweat and they're doing different activities, and hearing aids used to go on the fritz because of that. They don't do that nearly as much anymore. Sorry, let's see where we're at here. Okay, but there's other things besides hearing aids. So that's important to know. If you have hearing loss, it's a good idea to get a hearing evaluation and to not just talk about hearing aids, but to talk about, are there other things that maybe aren't very expensive that we can do to actually help your requirements, your day-to-day hearing function? And some things like a television device, there's different, some people can't tolerate hearing aids for different reasons, or can't invest in hearing aids for different reasons. But we'll get to that in a second, because I think everyone can based on the programs that are available that we know about. However, if you just want something to help you with the TV, there are certain devices available. If you need something to just help you with the phone, there are devices available. If you have trouble hearing your alarm clock, there are a thing that looks like an old Walkman, the Pocket, and they can't handle hearing aids because of dementia. A little pocket talker that's just like just over $100 might be able to help them when you go and visit them. They put little earbuds in their ears or a headset on, and you talk into the microphone, and it has like a good 6 feet cord. So there's lots of options out there. I hate for people to think, oh, I don't want to do anything. I don't want to get evaluated because I can't afford what I need. That's not necessarily the case by any means. A good source for all of the refer you on to them, but it's called the Deaf and Hear Alberta, and they have a website, and you can order things and they'll deliver them directly to you. So they're a great resource for all of us. I just want to make sure I'm checking my questions here. Is there a safe way to clean ears? Absolutely. You want to make sure that your eardrums are intact. And then what we recommend, we don't recommend Q-tips. They can scratch the ear. There's a delicate balance of wax and skin cells in your ear. And if you use Q-tips, it takes off that wax and it can scratch the top layers of skin cells and cause infection. So what we suggest instead is using a little bit of hydrogen peroxide and water, mixing it 50-50, using an eyedropper to put a couple drops in your ear, keep your ear up for 5 minutes, and then flush it out with a bulb syringe with lukewarm water. That's the safest way to do it. If you don't have all that stuff, no worries, go into the shower, go into the bath, get some warm water into your ears, and then use a Kleenex around your pinky finger afterwards to just clean out what you can get out of there. That's the safest way to clean them. Someone was asking, they said they had a eustachian tube inflammation and now their hearing is affected. Would a pocket talker help? Yes, a pocket talker could help. We should probably evaluate your hearing and make sure that we know how much hearing loss you have first, but a pocket talker can help most people who have hearing loss. It's a very easy thing to use. I'll go back to my slides now. Are a big investment. They are usually anywhere from around $2,000 and up, but with the caveat that that's not necessarily what you are paying. So if you are on a low income, if you're on the Alberta aids, get significant support for your hearing aids. And in many cases, between what the government covers on that program and what we can help get you on with a foundation program, you may not have to pay very much or even not have to pay anything at all to get hearing aids or other devices that you might need for you. Okay, so that's really important to understand. In some cases, if you don't qualify for those programs, but you still can't afford what you might need, there's other options too. So you can contact us to put you on a list, because we work with the Bowness Seniors Foundation, and we actually are collecting used hearing aids. We sanitize them, and we do a recycling program to help people who maybe don't fit quite into that funding graph, but just really based on what's going on right now, can't get the funding support that they need and just can't afford what they need. So there are other programs too. Like I had a patient yesterday who had a part-time job and then lost it, and so there's even temporary funding programs through the government that we know about. So regardless of what you might have been told, I would say it's worth contacting us and seeing if we can help get something for you if you feel like you might need help with your hearing. But the first step is to get a hearing evaluation, and we help you with all the applications. If you need help, please reach out to us. I would hate for someone to know or feel like they have hearing loss and not do anything simply because of the cost. And so somebody made a comment, they said, or they had a question, they said, do I think that people don't do anything because they're worried about the cost? Yes, that's part of it. But there's research to show that in countries where hearing aids are covered, like the UK, there's not much more uptake of people. People don't wear hearing aids much more. It's, I think, 27% of people wear hearing aids who need them in the UK, and 24% of them who need them in Canada wear them. So there's more to it than just the finances. There's also some stigma that people feel. So that's, part of what we do here is trying to educate you, trying to let you know that if you have hearing loss, it makes sense to do something about it because of brain health and because of social isolation, and living your best life, just like Colleen said. So I think it helps people know that I myself have some hearing loss. That's what brought me to this field. I've grown up around hearing loss. I've now had enough hearing loss that I've had hearing aids for 3 years, and I like to share that with people. I think it helps break down the barriers and maybe help reduce some of the stigma around getting hearing aids. So if you have hearing aids already, it's important that we keep up your listening skills and that you wear your hearing aids. Okay. So a lot of people might have hearing aids, but have them in a drawer. That's not helping your auditory system. That's not helping your brain. Consistency is key, just like exercise. If you want to stay healthy, you have to exercise every couple days. Um, think about the analogy to learning a language. If you go to language class once a week for an hour, sure, you'll learn a lot. But if you're immersed in that language, you're going to learn it fluently. That's the difference, okay? For other people, whether you have hearing aids or not, listen to music, listen to podcasts, speak on the phone with friends, watch movies, try, listen to the news, do as much auditory listening as you can. That's really healthy for the listening centers of the brain. Some take-home messages for how to hear now, better now and in the future. If you have concerns about your hearing or your loved one's hearing or someone you care about, getting a check is the first step, getting a baseline test. And also please consider treatment if you feel like, or if the audiologist tells you that there's some challenges with your hearing and they recommend hearing aids, at least consider doing something and investigating your options, because we know that the longer you wait, the more impact it has on your brain health. If you have more difficulty during COVID, consider, investigating those microphones, using those apps, using the online training program. Certainly also be creative. That's how we found out about all this kind of stuff. That's how we found out about clear face shields, because we realized, oh, wow, our patients who have severe hearing loss cannot hear us, even with their hearing aids. If we were wearing masks, they were having so much trouble. So we looked out in the community at, what other options there were. We just had to be a bit creative. And please ask for help. Ask us for help. Ask, your friends, family, Kirby Resources. Ask questions and ask for help, because that's how we become creative. When we know what the challenges are and what the questions are, then we can help come up with the solutions. So we are available to help you at 3 different locations. We have a location in the west part of the city. It's called Glenbrook Plaza. It's by West Hills. We have a location in Mission, down by the old Holy Cross Hospital. And then I am located at the Mount Royal West location. So there's a picture of my daughter when we opened the clinic this summer. We're also certainly able to help people who have trouble coming to us with our mobile care unit. So we have all the specialized equipment so that we can do testing for you in the comfort of your home or your residence, your seniors lodge. We're considered an essential service. We just have to run it by the management at whichever location you might be at. If you are in a lodge, they like to know we're coming. We have all the proper gear and equipment that we wear. Yeah, and then you can certainly stay up to date with what we're learning and research. New things come out all the time. I do use my website as an educational resource opportunity. So go to audiologyinnovations.ca and you can find out all sorts of information about all the questions that people have been asking. We have some things you can download there. I have blogs on there. I have links to videos on there. And then it also tells you how to find our YouTube channel. So there's lots of videos on there. You can sign up for our e-newsletter program in October, where every time we got a Google review, we would donate $20 to a senior support agency, Korea, which is a nonprofit agency in Calgary, just to help out seniors, because COVID is such a challenging period of time, and we know a lot of seniors are struggling. So if you're interested, you just have to go to our website and you can do a review right there. There's a link to do it right there. And you can do a review about this presentation. So that's everything I have to say, Colleen. I think I tried to go through the questions as we kind of went through the presentation, but certainly I'm more than happy to answer more questions. So yeah, so please, if you wouldn't mind typing a few of those, that would be great.
Yes.
And Colleen, if you have any comments or if you have any questions also.
Sure, absolutely. That was great information. Thank you very much. We're running a little bit. We're running a little bit over here. I just am going to Anonymous, most helpful. Thank you. I think that what I would do is encourage anyone that has any further questions, by all means, to get in touch with Dr. Scarff at audiologyinnovations.ca. Dr. Scarff, if you don't mind stopping your screen share, then I'm going to wrap things up here today.